So, Rachel, back for episode number 3 out of 4, talking about emotional intelligence. And today we're going to be covering motivation.
Yes, motivation. How do we do this? How
Yes,
do we
how do we do this? I
how
think
do
this
we
is a
do
struggle for a lot of people. So, I think it's important to dive into this pretty deep to help
Yeah,
people understand, when we're experiencing that lack of motivation to do the things that we want to do, or I hate to use the term should, because then you start like shoulding all over yourself, but it's, I think it's a pretty common thing that people experience. And they're like, why can't I get that internal drive to do the things that I want to do, or that I feel like I, need to do? So I think really putting together the components of this and looking at how we can possibly improve it, I think is a great deep dive for us to do today. So tell me more a little bit about motivation as it plays into emotional intelligence.
yeah, it's a really crucial component in emotional intelligence because that is our drive to achieve, right? That's what helps us be resilient. That's what helps us with self-regulation. And that's what gives us a positive outlook, our ability to empathize with people, our ability to influence people and impact people, and our ability to adapt to situations. So it is like this crucial component that holds all these pieces together. And we talked, I believe it was episode 2 about self-regulation. Well, yeah, you need motivation to be able to do that, right? So, and that's why
Yes.
emotional intelligence, it's like they all have to work together. They don't just, while they sit on their own, you need all the pieces for
Right.
everything to work
Yes.
correctly. And I
Yes.
know we'll get into it. Motivation is so much deeper than just like pushing ourselves or like willing ourselves or all the things that we try to do to get ourselves to get and stay motivated. It's so much deeper than that, and I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to this conversation today to talk about some of those things that are holding us back that we don't even realize.
Yes, absolutely. And I think kind of what lays at the kind of the base of this is many times when we're lacking this motivation to do something, there's some subconscious thoughts, beliefs that are playing under the surface that we're not
Yes.
maybe recognizing, that are in a sense kind of sabotaging or preventing us from having that motivation to do the thing or move forward in a certain way. And I love that you have this quote that's, your subconscious is your motherboard, and if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. And I
Ain't
think that's
nobody
so
happy.
true. It is so
Yes.
true.
Yes.
So let's talk about how much the subconscious kind of plays a part in this.
Yeah, and that quote came from Jen Sincero's "You Are a Badass" series, and I love that. Right, that whatever's going on in the subconscious, and I believe it's 90 or 95% of everything is happening in the subconscious. Like we don't even know what is going on in there, but it plays a lot into not only motivation, how we're navigating money, relationships, our health, our, our how what we believe we're worthy of or capable of or what's possible for us. Like there is so much happening in there that we don't even know is going on. That's sabotaging our ability
Mhm.
to do things. And until we start to bring those things from the subconscious to the conscious, it can become
Yeah.
really hard. And like, why, like you said, why don't I feel motivated? And I think
Mhm.
another important thing to think about too is our brains are wired for survival. They're not wired for things like happiness, for motivation. Like we're survival beings and we have to do the work, right? We have to take what's in the subconscious to the conscious so that we can get to a place where we feel we're happy and like we can push our brain to those spaces, but it's not innately natural to us.
Yes. Yes. And I think that even when I think there's a certain level within all of us that when pressed, we can make these things happen. But is it long lasting change that has
Right.
occurred? Because it's typically, yeah, our brains are pattern seeking missiles.
Yes.
We know what's comfortable. Anything outside of that comfort zone, it's like you might be able to pull this off for like a week or a couple of weeks. This is why New Year's resolutions tend to not stick, is
Right.
because you're making this drastic change so fast and your
Right.
subconscious hasn't been updated with the new information, and your
Yeah.
brain just sees this as like, okay, this is like completely abnormal, this is outside of our comfort zone. And without even realizing it, the subconscious kicks in and starts telling us things like, it's okay, you don't need to do that thing today. Like, what's one day without doing it? Or there's even like the beliefs of like, you're not worthy of this, you're not
Yeah.
worthy of taking care of yourself. I mean, it just kind of depends on like what direction you're trying to go with change.
Yeah.
um but yeah, you're right. I think it's like 5% of the time we're conscious of what we're doing, thinking, like in the moment, and the rest of it, 95%, is the subconscious, which is a little like, it's frightening to me a little bit, but it also makes a ton of sense when you look at like how people function in the world. You know,
Yeah.
driving to work, and sometimes you don't even remember, because it's the same path you've taken every day.
Yeah.
You don't even remember the whole drive there, which is just like
A little scary.
It's terrifying sometimes. What we can actually get away with, what we can do subconsciously is pretty fascinating.
Yes, yes.
So when we talk about bringing the subconscious to the conscious, this is a very difficult task, I think, to complete sometimes. What are some tools, tactics, ways that you would recommend to somebody to start helping them to bring those messages to the surface, where they can start to work with them, changing those beliefs, changing those ideas?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So some maybe, and none of these are necessarily easy or hard or simple or better than the other. They're just ways that we can do these. So we've talked about this before, the letter writing method, like
Mhm.
writing a letter to my health, or writing a letter to my body or my money or to my career, and talking to it, because I'm in a relationship with that thing. I am,
Yes.
whether I like to believe it or not. And, dear body, like I'm ashamed to be seen with you. Or dear money, like every time I get you, you run away from me. And it's just talking to them, right? In your relationship,
Mhm.
just to bring it up. Like, what are the beliefs that are coming up, the stories about my worthiness or what's possible that are coming out in that. So that's a great way to do it. I find another way to dig into our subconscious that we don't realize is leaking out is when we get triggered. Like when
Mm,
we get triggered in situations and we're starting to feel our blood pressure rise, and it's a real great moment to get present, to be like, what's really going on under the
yeah.
surface that's causing me to have a reaction to this situation, this trigger that's going on. There's a lot of journaling people can do.
Mhm.
And sometimes we know we sort of push these things aside, and it's just getting really real and being like, okay, like I don't feel like I'm worthy of money or greatness. And there is probably a story from our childhood about our worthiness that we sort of carried with us. So, all right, where's this I'm not
Yeah.
worthy come from? Or it's not possible for me. Well, where does that come from? Or it's selfish if I do this. Like those are the stories that we've been telling ourselves, where it's really important to start getting present about where did I learn that it's selfish, and why is it, and who told me that, and is it really? And those are a few different areas that you could start just to bring what's in your subconscious to your conscious
Yeah.
at an easy level. Granted, there is
Yes.
much more work done when it comes to therapy and EDMR and somatic, I mean, all those things that
Yes.
can really help bring up bigger things. But at a surface level, those are some great ways to start
Yeah.
to bring that in.
Yeah. I love it. I love, obviously, that I'm a huge fan of journaling, and I think that's a really great way to introspect and to kind of like start to see. It also brings up like pattern recognition, when you're able to
Yes.
go back and review what you kind of journaled about, and you're like, oh, look, this thing, this thought, this thing, whatever it might be, keeps surfacing. What's behind that?
Yeah.
And I know, like, the letter writing thing, that was very helpful for me when you had recommended that to me several months ago, because it kind of took me to a place where I was removed from the situation. It puts me almost into a third person, because I'm not writing for me. It's like more from that outside perspective,
Yes.
where
Yes.
you start to allow those things to kind of come up to the surface. I think it's also important to have like that, I call it white space, where it's like you're not doing anything, you're not trying to accomplish anything. I feel like this is where a lot of creativity happens, if you just stop for a minute, and that's
Yes.
when the ideas drop. But it's also when the thoughts kind of will surface to, or come to the surface, and you're like, oh, look at that. There's something that maybe I've been not really cognizant of. And then again, like you said, therapy, EMDR, I've even heard hypnosis is a great
Oh
way
yeah.
to bring subconscious to the conscious. So a lot of different modalities in that area. So what are kind of the components that we need to look at if we're lacking that motivation, that we can start to work on? Because there's really two components, right, that make up this motivation.
When you think about the conscious and subconscious memory, are you talking about like
Made up of like, so the self-awareness
Oh,
and the self-regulation are kind of
oh,
like
you're talking about the,
what,
yes, how they all come
yes.
together.
Yeah.
Yes. So motivation, when we're not feeling motivated, they're in the emotional intelligence space, we're not feeling motivated, there's something amiss with self-awareness, self-regulation. It could possibly also have to do with the social skills, the empathy side, but there's something amiss in that self-awareness space, like we just talked about, right? How do I get really clear, get present, like what's going on that is causing me to feel unmotivated or feel a lack of motivation or not, like what's in there. And self-regulation, our ability to manage and control our emotions and behaviors. And when we talk about motivated individuals, those people are better equipped to regulate their emotional response. Like motivated individuals are better equipped to handle self-regulation and when we're put into a situation. So when we're not feeling motivated, that's another place that we can start to look to be like, all right, something is also missing in these other spaces that's
Mm,
causing me to not feel motivated to do anything. Because I've never heard of someone who has really high motivation, but is totally unself-aware and unself-regulated. Like
right.
that doesn't happen. Or you don't find someone that's like extremely self-aware and self-regulated that is completely unmotivated. Like it doesn't quite compute. They all have to
Right.
go together.
Right. And I know like this hits home for me because I know, over the last few months,
Yeah.
I've kind of waxed and waned in the realm of, I'm feeling motivated to do something. And then like a couple of weeks later, it's like, okay, I'm lacking that motivation again. And I think something that you had kind of helped me to recognize was a lot of times there's a values conflict in this, or there's a value that we're not honoring. And there's the lack of motivation is because we aren't in alignment or in integrity with what is most important to us or what's a
Yeah.
priority. And of course, with the different seasons of life that we kind of go through, it's like your core values, typically we like to think that they stay the same, they stay static. But I think that a lot of times there's circumstances in life or seasons of life where maybe one of those core values isn't as important as one of the peripheral values that needs to be
Yeah.
paid attention to.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, that comes from that self-awareness of like, okay, something's off, something's not feeling right. Let me
Yeah.
start with looking at my core values. Um, how often do you think that is kind of one of the like main roots of a lack of motivation?
Yeah, if you're not aligned with what you're doing or what's going on, or and it's not aligned with who you are and what you need, it's not that we can't do things. Like we do things all the time. Like I fold laundry. It's not a core value, like we do, but the value that I believe that I bring to my family and to my life by doing that, there's a value there. But I guess in the bigger picture, their core values are the anchor to everything, even boundaries. Like, what are you protecting? Like, I mean, we talk about boundaries, but really we just have preferences.
Yeah.
And what are we really protecting? And your core values are it. And they need to be touched. And it's not like my core values are touched while I'm folding laundry, but my other core values throughout the day need to find
Yeah.
a space and a place to be touched, but we've often gotten so far removed from our values. We just have the values we had when we were a kid, which are probably
Mhm.
maybe they're decent values, right? Family, religion, honesty, whatever they are, but they might not be at the core anymore and who we are and what we need and what's important to us. And yeah, if you're not feeling motivated, it could be that some of your core values aren't being touched, right? And it's not
Mhm.
that it's one or the other. It's like, how do I make sure this core value is touched so that I can do the other thing? And let me give you an example. So I have I have a lot, I have values, but two that really stand out to me is I love solitude and I love nature. Like those are core values to me. I need solitude and nature to be touched daily, if not
Mhm.
multiple times a day. So for me, like I use my time, I'm running outside. So I'm by myself and I'm in nature, but I'm also exercising and I'm also using that time not to zone out, but I'm listening to something that's helping me mentally or
Mm.
um, thinking about something new or doing some self awareness in those moments. So now I'm touching upon my values so that later on in the day, when I have to do the things that aren't my favorite things, that's been touched. And I
Yeah.
show up so much better as a person and a friend and a partner because it's been touched. I mean,
Yes.
I'd love to hear what yours are too. What happens for you?
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think when you're honoring your core values and recognizing the importance of that, what you're actually doing is filling up your cup. And so that
Yeah.
all of the other things that you're doing, which there's going to be things in life that none of us really want to do, like nobody gets excited about cleaning the house or doing the laundry or cleaning the car, all these things, but it's like these are things we have to do. Even going to work sometimes can be difficult. But it's a necessity. And so I think it's looking at like, okay, what are my core values? How am I honoring those? And really that comes down to self-care too. I think that's a big part of it. And if you're filling your cup, then I think it creates more of that foundation to be motivated to sometimes do the things that we're not necessarily
Yeah.
super stoked about doing.
Yeah.
I think that makes total sense. And then I think too, that it's like, I think anytime I look at like, why am I not motivated to do this thing? There is that question of asking like, why do I not feel motivated? Is this something that I feel like I have to do
Yes.
or that I should do, but I really don't want to do it? And it really isn't something I absolutely have to do. I think it also kind of comes down to, is this in alignment with my values?
Yeah.
Or is there something about this particular task or thing that I'm taking on that doesn't feel like it's in alignment? And then I think there's that question too of like, what am I doing to fill my cup up so that I'm coming from a whole full place, which I do think is just inherent to feeling more motivated to do things and show up better in life.
Feel great. And not only to show up for other people, but to show up for yourself. So then I feel
Yes.
now that I've had those things that I need expressed or touched or I'm doing, then
Yeah.
I feel like, all right, I'm going to do one more thing for myself. I'm feeling really good. I'm feeling more motivated for myself. And I love what you say, because sometimes, not sometimes, we will, our habits will be, Kristen comes to me and says, Rachel, I need your help moving my entire house on Saturday. And maybe my formal people pleaser self and wanting to help is like, sure, I'll help you move, right? Just out of natural habit and reaction. And then Thursday or Friday comes along and I'm like, hold on a second. like I not that I in the moment to please or to seem
Yeah.
amenable or to feel like, okay, I got your back or whatever that is, I dishonored a value of mine and
Sure.
possibly. And now I'm like, and to your point that you made, like now I'm not feeling as motivated and I don't want to do it because that was going to be my day or something else was going on or I just don't want to
Yeah.
do it. But now
Yeah.
and of course I'm going to be not motivated, right?
Yep.
And I think that's what we're talking about, right? There's things that go on. There's like other things that are happening behind the scenes that cause us to say and do and react in a way in the immediate, right? Out of habit and pattern. And then later on, we're like, darn it.
Yeah. Why did I
Like,
say yes to this?
why did I sign up for that?
Yeah. I
You
think
know?
another good point that you brought up though is the self-regulation. Like motivated people have good self-regulation. So when we talked about that, we talked about getting triggered, which ultimately, when it comes down to it, being triggered is dysregulation of the nervous system. So you're in
Yeah.
fight, flight, freeze. And if you're in that space, whatever one of those responses you're having, it's hard to be motivated to do really anything because you are in survival mode, not thriving mode.
Yes, you have like your zone, your normal zone. And when
Mm.
things get pushed out of that, right? Fight, flight, or now we have freeze that's happening in there. Yeah, you're not going to be
Yeah.
motivated to do very much, but whatever needs to happen to get done to protect yourself, right? Your brain is a
Mhm.
survival machine, a predictability machine. Like it's not always thinking about best or whatever is
Yes.
going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think if
absolutely.
for the people that I think there are people that hang out for very long periods of time in
Oh,
dysregulated nervous system
yes.
states
Oh,
without maybe even
yes.
recognizing that they're in them. It's just like that's the normal for them. When you are spending that much physical and psychic energy just trying to survive in that state, taking on new things or doing more than just like being can be really difficult to take on because you're just exhausted at that point. Every resource that you have is trying to get you back into that window of tolerance, back to that baseline. And so I think, that's another probably good tool maybe is looking at things that help you to regulate your nervous system. I think that can be helpful and like bringing you back to a place where it's like, okay, now I'm back to where I'm not spending so much energy just trying to manage this. I now have more capacity mentally, physically, emotionally. I think emotionally is probably a really big one in that, to take on things that are outside maybe my comfort zone or make a change in a certain particular area. And I'm motivated, to do that. I think that's a super important part of it. So when we think to motivation versus procrastination, so I think these are two different things, but a lot of times I feel like they can feel like the same thing, because it's like if I'm procrastinating putting this thing off, is that because I lack motivation to do it, or is it kind of something different completely?
Yeah, and I'm definitely not a procrastination expert in the sense that I have procrastinated, but the science behind procrastination, definitely not in that space. But procrastination isn't always a bad thing, right? There's people who work well under the pressure and they get a lot done, and that's when their creative juices start flowing and they can make a lot happen. I think for individuals, for ourselves, to your point that you brought up, like, why is like getting really present and clear with myself? Am I not doing this because I'm procrastinating and I'm putting other things in the way of the thing I know I need to be doing because I really don't want to do it, or it's going to be hard or difficult? It's a conversation I don't want to have. It's whatever it is. And so I'm purposely putting things in the way to keep from doing it. I think it's getting really present and clear with ourselves, which we don't always do. We live in a state where our subconscious is doing the thinking, and we have all sorts of things going on in our minds about people and places and stuff and conversations and this and that, and getting really present. Like, maybe I'm not motivated. It's not because I really want to procrastinate. I got to clear up a few things first, and then I can, with myself, so I can get to do it. But getting to that point of getting really present and clear with ourselves. Is this procrastination? Am I just putting this off because I don't want to do it? I said yes when I didn't mean it. I don't want to have that conversation. Like, I'm dreading that. Then of course I'm not going to feel motivated. Or is it something else that's going on that just needs to be cleared up? I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'm kind of a habitual procrastinator. And that, which is, sometimes it's a good thing because it does create the pressure in a sense, almost to get things done. Like once it gets to like that critical point where it's like the timeline has run out on this, it needs to happen. I have found that I'm actually very productive in like going into that mode of just like get it done like now. I think it showed up for me a lot when I went into solopreneurship, but not so much from the point of like not wanting to do things. I found myself in a situation of like not knowing exactly how to do things. And then it was like, oh, well, I need to learn how to do this thing before I can actually do it. But then that led to like procrastinating, where it's like, now I got to take another course on this. Now I got to do another.
Sign up for this.
Yes. And the next thing you know, you're not getting any closer to moving the needle on actually doing the thing, which most of the time, I'll be honest, I think we learn more from doing the experience rather than trying to take the knowledge in. And I honestly, I don't know where I remember reading about this, and I think it might have actually been Brendan Burchard, talks about the when we feel capable and competent in doing something, it takes away that procrastination part of it. It's like, that competence loop, I think is what he calls it. But you can get trapped in that competence part because you're just trying to build the confidence of how am I going to do this, or learning the skill, that you're not ever doing the actual thing to gain the confidence and I can actually do this thing. So I think it is really good to like discern between like when there's something on that list that is not getting done, it's like sitting down and being like, okay, is this procrastination? And if so, like what's behind the procrastination? Or is this a lack of motivation, like something else is going on in the subconscious or outside circumstances that is affecting my willingness to step up to the plate and get started on this task or change or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for me, a big change, what shifted over the past couple of years in entrepreneurship, solopreneurship, is doing the hard things first. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would definitely put the hard things off because it was I people pleaser, perfectionist. Like I put it off instead of just do the hard things first, and then everything else after that is easy. Like answer the hard email first. Like
Yes.
look at that contract that's so long. Yeah, like do that first.
Yep.
And then and it's having to make that, but a conscious switch, because
Yes.
I easily have a list of things and I'm like, I haven't quite done that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Because I'm like,
definitely.
it's gonna cost money, or it's gonna take time, or it's not that important, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes. And when you
it's
start, when that rationalizer starts coming
start
up,
showing up.
where it's
Like,
like, you don't have to do this, or that's going to cost money. Like those are the thoughts to catch yourself in, because that's
yes,
those subconscious thoughts that are happening that are preventing you from maybe stepping into a new space or something that's unfamiliar. And it's funny that, you bring up like doing the hard thing first, because in another conversation with a different podcast guest, we talked about Brian Tracy's book about productivity. And it was like, you have to like eat the frog first thing. And it was like, so in your day, when you're looking at it, like the thing that you either don't want to do the most, or the thing that is going to be the most difficult, you do that first, because then it's
yes,
out of your way, and that frees you up to be able to do all of the smaller, easier things that are maybe more appealing to you
yeah,
on
a
your
little more
to-do list for the
natural.
day.
There's a great quote, and I really wish I could figure out who it is. And if we do, I'll give it to you so we can put it
Okay.
in the show notes of this. But it says the magic you're looking for is in the work that you're avoiding.
Yes. I
And
love
saying,
that.
yeah, right. And I think to your point, you just brought up, like doing the hard things first. Like the magic you're really looking for is in what you're avoiding doing. And what you said, like when your
Yeah.
negotiator starts to step in and talk you out of all the things. And it happens. And
Mhm.
we talk about this stuff all the time. And even myself this morning, I was like, I'm gonna go on a nice long run with the dog. And the dog was asleep. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll just work out here, and like the dog, and like my brain is like telling me, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like you've been looking
Right.
forward to this for and it's like, and then you just get out there. And once I think you could say this too, like once you start getting into the cadence, it's really not
Yes.
as bad as you thought. I think I spend sometimes more times in dread of
Yeah.
avoidance than like once I'm in it, I'm like, oh, it's fine.
Yes. And it's always those things too. Like as a runner, I get this. There's days where I'm like, I am not feeling this at all. And then, like the negotiator steps in and it's like, here's all the reasons why you could allow yourself to not do this today. But I can't think of many times where after doing it, I haven't been so glad that I did it. Like I feel good about it. I also feel good about myself that it's like I was trying to talk myself out of this, and I did the hard thing and I showed up for it. And I did it. And there's been days where I've set out and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 6 miles. And maybe it was only 4, but I'm like, 4 was better than none. So
And sometimes those days turn out, you're like, I'm feeling pretty good, I'm gonna go an extra
yeah.
mile. I mean, that happens as well. But yeah, the magic you're looking for is in the work that you're avoiding. And I do believe that. And I think as we think deeper about our relationships and our careers and the things we really want for ourselves, and we
Yeah.
think about what am I avoiding doing, you think about us like leaving careers to jump into entrepreneurship, solopreneurship, and anyone will
Yeah.
tell you like that's not an easy jump. It's not like you're overnight success, like by any means. What
No.
it's 10 years to an overnight success, like it takes a long time. But you stopped avoiding it, right? You're like, all
Yeah.
right, I'm just going to jump in and do this, and I'm just going to enjoy the unfolding while it's happening. Some days not as much.
Yeah. Sometimes it's going to be a chore, but I think consistency
Yes.
is the key to that. The more
And
that you're
yes,
consistent, the more
yes,
self-trust you build. And it's like, okay, I don't feel like doing this today. And it may not be like my best self doing it today, but it's consistency. And I know like Stephen Pressfield wrote a book called The War on Art. And he talks about like, so this is kind of based towards writers, creators, And he talks about like the biggest thing that you're going to come up against is resistance. And I think this translates into all areas of life. Like when you feel that resistance, his advice is you have to show up, you have to sit your ass in that chair, and you have to do the writing, or you have to do the thing. And he's like, and some days it's not your best work. Some days I look at the work that I've done and it's like, I just want to throw that in the trash because it was so, so horrible. And he's like, but then, 2 or 3 days later, I go back and look at it and there's this like gem that came out that I'm now going to take this and run with it. And he's like, so even when I thought I wasn't doing my best work, it ends up that there was still something to glean out of at least showing up and doing the thing that I promised myself I'm going to do. And I think that, again, like that translates to, doing a workout routine. I think it translates to any kind of habit change that you're trying to do. It's like, if you can just show up and get into it and make that like a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Over time, I think it gets a little bit easier to do the thing. And this isn't always about things that we don't find enjoyable. I love podcasting. I love it. Yeah. But there's also this part of like the editing, the producing. It's a lot of work on the backside, and then now trying to float that with a full-time job is a very different scenario than it was when it was like I was in just the solopreneurship. And it's like, I do find myself like some days not motivated, never not motivated necessarily to have the conversations. Like that's the fun, like easy part. Yeah. But doing the editing, it's like bringing myself, like motivating myself to sit down and say, okay, I've got to get this episode edited and produced and then uploaded and all that. But it's one of those things like that is the consistency of it. Like, okay, maybe I just only do it for 30 minutes today. But I know that and that's something I enjoy, like really enjoy. So I think it's just one of those things that you have to kind of look at and give yourself space and grace when it needs to be space and grace. But I think if you can consistently prove to yourself that you can show up for yourself and the things that you really want, I think that it starts to shift that motivation towards the more positive side.
Yeah. You said so many great things in what you just said. And I want to just highlight that, like you said, showing up for yourself, like we train ourselves that we can't trust ourselves because we stop showing up for ourselves. Right. So it can be, we've told our, we've tried to do the thing before and it hasn't happened. And so we've trained ourselves not to trust ourselves, and when we show up, we start to rebuild trust with ourselves. So like, all right, I know I can do this. And I'm rebuilding trust with the relationship with myself, which I don't know if we always talk about or think about, but a lot of us, and I know I had to rebuild trust with myself. And part of rebuilding that trust is showing up aligned to my core values. And another thing that you talked about, which I love, is like just intentionality, like having intentionality. I don't know everywhere where all this is going to go. I don't have a 20-year plan with an exact roadmap of what I need to do, but I have a general space where I want to be, which used to be all over the place. Now it's starting to get, now with intentionality and time and doing the things, I get more excited about, things. I can see things a little more clearly, and I just make decisions in this direction. Yeah. Just decisions in this direction. And we talked about this in another app, like just 1%, 1 degree shift is all I have to do. Just what's the next best decision I can make? It's not that I don't sit on the couch and scroll for 2 hours mindlessly. Yeah, I do that too. Like there's some nights where I'm like, and I'm not going to punish myself for that either, but I'm also going to recognize when I'm talking to myself about, you didn't get that chapter done on that book that you're writing, or you didn't get your writing in today. Like, all right, well, I made a different decision last night. I'm going to make a different intentional decision tonight to do it different. Not punish myself for what I did. Yes. But be mindful of the next decision I need to make, because that is in this space. Scrolling on the couch has a different space, but if that makes sense. And that keeps me motivated. It's like, all right, and not punishing myself for what didn't happen. Just starting now, what can I do moving forward to make the next best decision possible? Yep. And with my values.
I love that you bring that up, because it also makes me think too, that when like one of the journal prompts that I use on a daily basis is I make one small promise to myself, that it's like, I'm going to keep this promise to myself to build that self-trust up, that it's like, I'm going to do the things that I say that I'm going to do. And I've noticed, as my work schedule has been fluctuating and been crazy, trying to readjust to a new schedule, that it was like, I had this like, setup of like what days I did certain things. And now that's kind of like shifting around completely. And so for the last couple of weeks, the time that I had dedicated to doing personal growth and like focusing in on like, okay, reevaluating where I'm at, recalibrating after all of the massive changes the last few months, I haven't done that personal growth. And the recognition is like, when I don't make space for that, I notice the effect that it has in all of the other areas of my life. And so I'm staying, like, it almost to me feels like I'm in this static place and I'm not expanding and growing, which is one of my core values. And so when I'm not making the time for that, so it was like I had to sit back down and be like, okay, let's look at the new normal, the new schedule,
Yeah.
and where does this fit in, and where does it make the most sense to fit in, knowing how it's going to make me feel that day or the few days after. So I think it is sometimes that we let things fall by the wayside, or it's like we let the things that maybe they're important, but if we're letting something go that is very valuable to us, we have to get intentional about saying like, where am I going to carve out the time for this?
Yeah.
Even though things have shifted, changed, the scenario looks a little bit different.
Yeah. And if I'm saying yes to this, what am I saying no to? And if I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
no to this, what am I saying yes to? And you said to carve it out, be intentional,
Yeah.
think about things differently. Yeah. There's so
Yeah.
much to motivation, what keeps us motivated, why we're not motivated. There's so many areas and aspects, which I think is really cool. Like you can't get it wrong. And this on this
Yeah.
journey in emotional intelligence, like you can't get it wrong. Any little bit of awareness. And this is where I'm going to get woo woo on in the conversation.
I love the boost, so bring it on.
I can say when I am intentional and I am doing the things I say I'm going to do and I'm showing up, that's when like the little miracles start to happen. Like the
Yeah.
little things that and it almost feels like they come out of nowhere sometimes, or there's like these little gifts that start to show up that it's like, okay, when I'm doing the right thing and I'm doing these things for me and I'm
Mhm.
sitting down to do the work when I feel like doing something else, not, like the little, I feel for me, it's when like the random email comes in from the random person that's like, we want you to come speak, or this thing comes in that I wasn't even expecting. And you're like, oh God. And here I was just head down working on my next book and my chapter, just staying
Mhm.
focused. And I don't know, do little miracles happen for you when you find yourself in that space or?
Yes, and I when I'm showing up for myself, so this is kind of like one of those weird, and this is definitely woo woo. Um, when I'm doing things that are in alignment with who I am and where I want to go, and I'm doing the actions that are moving me in the direction of like my dreams, right? I see repeating numbers all the time. And that's
Oh,
almost like this cue to me that it's like, yeah, you're on the right path. Like it's
doing the right thing.
this nudge of saying, and I think they all mean different things, like the 333s, the 444s. But I see 1111 on a extremely consistent basis, which is like supposedly like a reminder that it's like, yeah, you're on the right path. Like pay attention to what you're doing when you see that, or like what you're
Mm,
thinking about, and that tells you like that's your direction to go. And I think actually I have this quote up here that is the same. So I read this summer, and it says, remember, the universe is watching over lost souls, particularly when they dream. And
mm,
I think that's so true. I think that when we're in those spaces where we're following our dreams and doing the things,
yeah.
and although you may feel lost because you don't see this path or this clear trajectory to get you to the thing that you know that you want, but when you're doing the actions and showing up for them, I think that's when there's like this co-creation happening
Yes.
between you and the universe.
Yeah, because it's all energy and
Yep.
it's wild. And I've heard other people talk about it. I know I feel it. It's great. You see it like when we're doing the things in alignment with like these little
Yeah.
things start to happen and which keeps us motivated. It keeps us
Yep.
motivated because I mean, it's not like it happens every day, all day, or whatever. But I'm just gonna make the next best decision, and great, wonderful things happen.
Yeah.
They show up for
Yeah.
us. Doors
Yep.
open. Calls
Yep.
get made. Emails show up. And you're like, wow. It's
Yep.
really cool.
And sometimes even just that little nudge, like when I see 11:11 and it's like, I'm working on the podcast, it's like, okay, there's my nudge, right? That
There it is.
I'm doing the thing that is like in alignment. And it gives you this boost of like, okay, keep going, keep persevering through this. And it's funny because one of the girls that I work with, she tends to kind of go into this like scenario of like the worst case scenario all the
Oh yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
so like my joke with her is like, don't manifest that, because I do think you can
Yes.
manifest these things
Yes.
into your life. So if you start your day
Yes.
out with like, today is just going to go to shit, and it's already like this bad thing has
Yes.
happened, and now it's always my luck that this happens, or something goes
Mhm.
wrong, or things don't work for me. And so like pretty constantly I'm saying to her, I'm like, don't manifest that today. We're going to say
Yes.
today is going to go smooth. Everything is going to work for us. It's all
Yes.
going to come together how it's supposed to come together. Which again, manifesting is one of those very woo-woo concepts, but I do believe that it's like, if you're setting yourself into a mindset of negativity and things are not going to go right, I think that is like a huge motivation killer, because you've already
It
like
is.
determined at that point that it's not going to go well.
Yeah, and
And
what you think about, you're gonna get. And to that point, self-regulation, when, people who are motivated tend to be optimistic, they tend to have a very positive outlook. They're able to self-regulate when like those things are happening, because we don't all have great days. We all have had the days where you got up and everything just seems to like go wrong all day long. And you're like,
yep.
what? WTF universe? Like, what are you
Right.
doing? But my ability to like shift it to be like, just reframe, like, listen, we're just gonna keep moving forward. We're just do the next thing. I
Yeah.
I can handle this. I'm capable. I know how I can get through this. That shift in language, that shift in
Yes.
perspective, like
Yes.
all that is what helps keep us motivated. But if I'm telling myself everything always goes wrong for me,
Yep.
and why, of course I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
And when we talk about emotional intelligence, we also, this can also be, they could be trauma responses. Like, I'm gonna get empathy from that, right?
Yep.
Someone's gonna, oh my gosh, what happened?
Yeah.
And we can just, then we just start to continue that cycle, that negative energy that could be stopped, and just let's
Yeah.
move on to something else. So there's
Yeah.
a lot there. There's a
Right. Because
lot there.
if you're in a space with somebody who is like that, it like, here comes entrainment. It's like you're either going to
Yeah,
come down to their level of energy,
yeah,
or if you don't boost the energy, that's what's going to happen. You're going to go down to their level. But if you boost it, then it's like you're hoping that they can at least maybe come up one level, not maybe necessarily where you
yeah,
are. But it's, it's like looking at things from a different perspective. Like I for sure last week had that day where it was like everything was like one step off. Like I'd go to take a patient back to the ER, and like as I turn the corner, the doors start closing, and I'm like, of course the automatic doors
of
would
course.
close right before I
Right,
need to
right
go
there.
into them. So, but then when all of those things start to compound, then I just look at it and I'm like, well, it's just this comedy of errors that has been happening all day. Like I'm just one step off from the flow of the day, but it's actually kind of comedic at this point. Like I just have to laugh at it. This
Yeah,
is a normal human experience that people go through
totally.
all the time. But if I can laugh at it and bring that energy into the workspace versus the like, everything keeps going wrong, doors are closing right in front of me every
Yes.
step of the way, then yeah, that's what you're going to be experiencing.
Yeah, and we can get even more woo woo about this. Is they talk about, when these things are happening to us, that, and we talk about this in Kabbalah too. Like, the universe is trying, like, they're trying to tell, there's something that you need to be doing differently, and you're going to keep experiencing very similar situations until you
Yes.
start to navigate through that, and realize like, oh, maybe I need it. For me, it's patience. The universe is always giving me opportunities to practice my
Yeah.
patience. It's always giving me opportunity, I mean, always. And so when those things happen, I'm like, all right, you're working on me. You want me, I need to be working on myself. I need to be thinking and make a shift. But that's that's a very like different, not concept, but way to think about it. But like, all
Yeah.
right, I'm just this, it's teaching me something about myself right now that apparently I
Yep.
need to learn, and I'm just going to work through that, so that when it happens again, I've already worked through it. I can reframe
Yeah.
it very quickly. I don't have to get
Yeah.
mired down in it.
Yes.
But I think too, motivation, when we think about external motivation, like the people you hang around with, like you talked about,
Yeah.
the language that they use, maybe the judgment or gossip that's going on. Like when you're
Yeah.
working on yourself, it it's a very different space to be like, not to get into those conversations when I'm so used to being part of that conversation,
Yeah.
or my whole family is very negative and that's just the way we are, and having to shift ourselves into a higher state of consciousness awareness to be like, well, I don't want to be like that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so outside can have a very big effect on our
Yes.
motivation, willing to be motivated, society, cultural standards, religion, all sorts of things that want to
Yep.
put us into a space where we belong, where that
Yeah.
thinks we belong. And
Yes.
there can be big dissonance there if you
Absolutely.
are in this space, you're like, but I don't want to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, we've talked about this in several areas where a lot of times when we start to make these changes in ourselves, whether that be more self-awareness, the self-regulation, not participating in things like gossip or talking negatively instead of,
Yeah.
coming from a place of kindness, that inevitably the people who are at that lower vibration that aren't elevating themselves or elevating you are just naturally going to kind of fall by the wayside. They I can't remember who the original quote goes to, but it's like, you are the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if you're spending time with negative people who are unmotivated, well, there's
Yeah.
your first like inclination into what could be causing that. And to the Kabbalah thing, like I've delved more into it because I think it's super interesting, the philosophy behind it.
Hmm.
But I think even taking it out of like a spiritual or religious or woo-woo context, it's like if you keep experiencing things over and over and over again that are not pleasant, then you have to do something to change that. You have to expand in some way for
Yeah,
that to
the
not
common
continue.
denominator. Who's
Yes.
the common denominator here?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of those unmotivational posters that used to be like really big in the 90s. And it was like, the common denominator between you and all of your failed relationships is and it's like, we have to start looking at like, okay, what's the
Yeah,
trend here? And if I don't like the trend, if I don't like where this is going, and I'm finding myself demotivated by this, then it's like, okay, what do I need to do? Here comes back to that. Instead of why is this happening to me? It's what can I do to shift the tides?
yeah,
What can I do working on myself, or how can I bring expansion to myself in this so that I don't keep going through the loop, learning the
yeah,
same lesson, actually, but not even learning the lesson, just going through the vicious cycle of it without
yeah.
ever actually making it out. Like that's never fun
And
at
I don't know
all.
whether it was conscious or unconscious for you, but like asking those what questions we talked about in self
Yeah.
awareness, like what can I do differently? What's the next best decision? What's another way I can look at this? What's another way next time when this happens? What's a different way I can show up?
Yep.
People with high self awareness, they ask themselves those what questions. Not that we talked
Yes.
about, not that why isn't important, but
Right.
we could get really
Yeah.
stuck in mindset of just like, all
Sure.
right, what can I do differently?
Sure.
And I want to, and I know you agree this, like, it's not that anyone's ahead or behind or more something or better or anything like that. Like
Enlightened.
enlightened or like we're all in our own on our own journeys and our own
Hmm.
places. And it's just where people are, just like I'm just where I am, you are where you are. And how can we, I think the best thing is what can we do to help? We all win when we cross the finish line together, but like what's the best way that I can show up so
Yes.
that I win and then everyone else around me wins? And when we talk about motivation, people, motivated individuals have impact and influence because when we see people
Yep.
doing things differently, getting the results, like it motivates us. Like,
Yes.
I mean, look at, I mean, the books we read, the people we admire, the incredible athletes. And like when we see, like, we're like absolutely motivated to go do because we're like, it's the impact and influence that motivation has. And it's not just the big names and the big people, but it's you and it's me. And it's just showing up
Uh,
for ourselves, making the next best decision. Other people see that.
Yes.
They see that.
100%.
And then you motivate them to do what maybe they need to be doing. Might not be the exact same thing you're doing, but something else. They're inspired, which I think is
Yes,
beautiful.
it is. And I think a lot of times what that comes with too, when you're role modeling something and somebody recognizes that, it gives them permission to do the
Yes.
same thing. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of people, that's what they're missing sometimes, is that self permission or permission from an outside place to do the thing that they feel like they can or aren't motivated to do. But then when they see somebody, and for me, I am truly motivated more by like average day, like humans in their normal life
Yes.
versus like the big, the big names, because I'm like, look at this everyday person, like doing badass stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if that person can do badass stuff, like I know that I
Yeah.
can do it. And then, but you also have like them showing you the path, right? That it's like,
Yeah.
okay, if I just do the things that they're doing, and maybe that changes, maybe it's a different path for everybody, but it's like, at least it gets you started with that first step of like in the right direction. And then
Yes.
you let your own path, your own journey unfold in that sense.
Yes. I exclamation point on that.
Exclamation point on that.
Not
I think another important point that you brought up in like the presentation that you sent me around your keynote speech is finding your why and why you're doing something. And really identifying that. And I know like this was many years ago, Simon Sinek came out with, start with why.
Yeah.
And that builds that foundation of like what's going to drive you moving forward. So to me, I think that's super important too. If you're feeling like you're lacking motivation to do something, like revisiting, why do I feel like I want to do this, or why am I doing this?
Yeah. I agree. Like, am I doing it for my health? Am I doing it for my family? Am I doing it for who am I doing? What's going on? And I don't want to confuse it with like finding a purpose or, doing my passion, because that's a whole other thing.
Yes. Yes.
That's not that's not what I mean by finding your why, but like why? Why is this important to me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when I can nail that down, then it makes me more motivated to do the thing that I need to get done. For me, my health, right? In my age where I am, and I have a young son and had him late. And so I'm not going to be around forever. But if I can do
Yeah.
something every single day that's going to put myself in a better position to at least try to be here
Yeah.
for as long as I can, then I'm going to do that, right? That why
Mhm.
is to be around, right? To show up so that I can, be here for as long as I can. And everyone's is different.
Yeah.
And different things have different whys in my life and why I do it and why it's important. And just asking ourselves that, because if we have no, like we said, if we have no connection to the thing, I don't know what my values are. It's all just sort of preference and flying in the wind. Like, what are we really wrapping our arms around? What are we protecting? What
Yep.
what is in that value space for us? And so
Yeah.
I'm interested to know your thoughts about the why.
I think it's important to do, especially like, I mean, I in a sense, it's like, I don't want to like re-mention this book, but it was such a paradigm shift for me around time and to-do lists, and all the things that are on our to-do list. So it's 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And he talks about how, we have this sense that we need to clear the decks all the time. So we have these to-do lists, and it's like, once I get to the bottom of my to-do list and I get all those things done, then I can relax, then I can do the projects that I want to do. And it's looking at that to-do list, and first of all, realizing it is never going to be, you're never going to clear that deck. You're never, ever going to clear that deck. But then looking at it and saying like, what's the reason why I feel like this even needs to be on my to-do list? So it's asking that question of like, why is this important to me? And recognizing that it's like, we only get, so the 4,000 weeks thing is like, if you take the average human lifespan, we get 4,000 weeks. Then now you take like the age that you're at and figure out how many weeks you've been alive, subtract that from 4,000, and you see what you've got left if you're the average. And of course it could be less or more, but it's a little bit shocking when you get to midlife and you're like, oh crap, I've only got this many weeks left. It really hones in on what is super important to me and what matters most, and how do I want to spend the weeks that I have remaining. How do I want to live those? And what do I want to bring into my life? And what's not so important to me that's maybe on that to-do list? And I think, again, recognizing that you're never going to clear the deck. You're never, ever going to get there, ever.
I love
So I think that's, it's an important thing to look at. I also think it's a really good thing to look at when you're maybe thinking about starting a new project, whether that be like writing a book, starting a podcast, starting your own business, whatever it is. It's like, why do I want to do this? And I think part of that too is tying it back to core values and being like, what value is this honoring?
Yeah.
And then when you've made that connection, I think there's that it creates at least that understanding of like why the drive is there to do it. And the days that it's maybe not so easy to show up for that, it's like, remember your why, remember that
Yeah.
you're on what value you're honoring by doing this.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think so. And if we think about, we thinking like in more of a neurotypical sense, but people have different neurospace. Like they start to do something, right? Because they want to get done, and then it goes off into the other space or whatever, and then it can feel like, oh God, and now I got nothing done, and I have a bigger mess, or other. And but all this to say is that let's just be space and grace for like the why. I started it because this is what I was looking for and what I needed, and staying with that, right?
Mhm.
And remembering that, and not getting ourselves so worked up about what else, but
Yeah.
my why
Yes.
is trying to make slow decisions in the right direction that we need
Yes.
to do
Yeah.
to yeah.
You know, a perfect example of this is like when I look at like my ever growing to-do list, because I still keep like a master to-do list. You know, when I just think of stuff for me to get it out of my head, so it's not just like a constant loop. It's just like write it down, right? And I've been needing to repot a lot of my plants because some of them have now found their natural environment here in Arizona where they are flourishing like crazy. All of my cactuses are like
Oh,
like
nice.
growing.
Colin, yay.
So they need to be repotted. And it's something that I've just kind of been pushing off, pushing off, pushing off. And it's now come to the point where it's like the plants are not going to live if I don't get
Yeah,
the
no,
thing
that's from the
done.
opposite direction,
You
right?
know? And then I think to myself, I'm like, so what would happen if they just died? Like, what's the why of why I feel this is so important? Then I think about that. It's like, to me, it's important that I'm seeing something that I'm fostering grow.
Yeah,
They clean the air in your house. They
that's
create
really
more positive moods. I mean, there's
beautiful.
all of these benefits, and it's something honestly that I really do enjoy. Um, and so once I looked at that, it was like, okay, I'm going to stop pushing this off. I need to find a plant stand that also reaches like the height of the one window that I have to get the sunlight to the cactuses. And it's so it just, to me, when I look at like my to-do list, it's like that may not seem like a huge priority, but it is important to me. And it's important to me in that sense of like, it makes my physical environment more comforting, more healthy, more beautiful, which then motivates me to do other things when I'm surrounded by things that I love and make my environment feel good.
And I'm sure with the to-do list though, you have things on the to-do list that are like nice to have, need to get,
Yes.
and that like trying to avoid. There's all sorts of things. And
Yeah.
I'm sure if you and I hung up today and you got in your car and you drove to Home Depot or Lowe's, you could knock this out in like 45 minutes. You could be home,
100%.
everything you need, be all done, whatever. But then how quickly, which I like, your brain is like, but there's other things on this to-do list that are
Yeah.
important.
I still have 6 episodes that I need to edit and
Yeah.
upload.
So,
And so,
and so
but
even
it
though it's
is.
on the list, it's still in your
Yeah.
head, bringing around in your brain all day long.
Yeah.
Like I can get those plants repotted and do that. And that's
Yeah.
really important. But which
Yes.
back to motivation, and when we think about staying motivated and what's the why, what brings me the most pleasure, what can I get
Yeah.
done, and like really thinking about, all right, because like we talked about, you could talk yourself out of anything
Oh,
very
yeah.
quick. And how do we
Yeah.
stay motivated to like, all right, I'm just going to go for the next hour, this is going to be my project. And
Yep.
6 episodes would not get edited in an hour, but maybe six
Yep.
episodes getting edited, and that hour is crucial
Yep.
in how we just staying aligned with the things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
both are part of like who you are in your business and what you do and what you love
Yes.
and your values. So
Yes.
you can't lose. You can't
Yeah.
lose.
Yes. And I think, I mean, that just goes back to the intentionality
Yeah.
part of it, where it's like, okay, maybe right now editing the podcast episodes is the most important time crucial thing that needs to happen. But then looking at like next week and saying, okay, when am I going to carve out the time, the hour and a half that it might take to go to the store and get the bigger pots and get the soil and all that stuff, and actually come home and do the replanting process. That's the intentional part of it. It is important to me. And maybe like right now in this moment, it's not the most important thing, but I know that it is something that I need to carve time out for.
Yes.
because it's something that I want to do and that I need, I feel like I need to do if I don't want them to die. I love those guys. I mean,
Love like looking at, I mean, how much peace would it bring to look at them and be like,
yeah.
they're in a new pot, they got their nice new soil, they're in their nice, beautiful stand, and like
Yep.
you can just let that slip
Yeah.
away.
I think the plant people out there will get this if you're not
I think
into,
you're not, yeah, if
plants.
not for people are like, just let it die. What does it even
Right. Who cares?
I
Just go
need
get
plants
another
in my
one.
environment.
Yes.
I get it. Oh, it does turn into a plant conversation. But to the
Yeah.
point, like getting it done does bring so much joy, right? That's like
Yes.
the joy
Yes.
part of your environment and your space. And that could be for people who do like to clean, right? Cleaning can bring joy. Like I like my nice neat, tidy, and when it's clean, I can relax and I feel joy in the environment. Um, it does bring something to
Yeah.
you. And
Yeah.
I would get back to the why.
Yes. Important stuff. Okay. So is there anything that we need to talk about to wrap up the motivation portion of this? I guess like if the question that I would have is if you were doing a workshop or giving a keynote or with a coaching client and this lack of motivation came up, or it's like, I'm not feeling motivated to do the things, what would be maybe like the tips, tricks, hints, tactics that you would give them to look at or consider to kind of like be able to shift that stuckness, I think.
Yeah, my first question would be, tell me what's going on, wanting to hear. And usually in the story, we'll hear a belief system or rules or things that are going on that are keeping them from feeling motivated. And undoubtedly, there is a value that's missing somewhere.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, it's there. And when we're not feeling motivated, a simple thing, and I think we might have it in this episode when you upload it, but a value sheet is just look and see what's really important to me and what might be missing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, and I think the most amazing thing about values we talked about is anytime I do that, people are like, I didn't know this was a value. I didn't even know that was a value. Like we almost don't even know what we don't know about our value system
Yes.
and what's important to us. And so I would say most after tell me what's going on, undoubtedly they have separated from themselves and they
Mm-hmm.
are doing things that are not aligned with who they are or what they want, which is creating some lack of motivation
Mm-hmm.
at a coaching level. I would
Yeah.
say that that's where I would go.
Yeah. And I think it's important too when we talk about core values because it's just like these words, right? When we do a values assessment, it's like loyalty, novelty, environment. I mean, it's like these very broad terms. And the beautiful thing about it is you get to define what that word means to you when it comes to the value. Because I think everybody's going to have different definitions. I'm sure you could like look up the Merriam-Webster definition of that word, but you're going to see it from like your life experience, like how the color of the lens that you're looking through. And I think it's also important to say that it's like nobody gets to tell you how to embody that or honor that value. You get to decide that.
Yep.
And there's no right or wrong way to do that. We're all going to express our values in different ways, even if we have, the same shared value. How we identify with that, define it, and then express it is going to be unique to us, which I think is like one of the most beautiful things about the human experience is that we all get to be so unique and individual, but yet the similarities that we share and the common experiences, the common threads and that. So I think that's very important.
Let me just add on to that. Let me just give examples of that. Just so we can give
Sure.
examples to your listeners. Like wealth is a value,
Mm-hmm.
but everyone's perspective on wealth could be very different. It's like
Yeah.
beauty is a value. People, oh, a ton of money, that's wealth. Like, how could, that seems selfish, right? But that's not might be what wealth means for people. Beauty could come
Mm-hmm.
out as like looks or
Yes.
beauty in nature. It could be beauty. And I think another one that always trips people up when I do these is abundance. Or like abundance can feel like a wealth of blessings and just my life is good. Abundance can be a lot of stuff. Like it's up
Mm-hmm.
to you, to your point, to decide
Yes.
whatever that value is for you, and not judging other people if they said wealth is a value, that we're not automatically running it through our
Yeah.
bias or thought process to say and give them our definition when it could be something
Yeah.
totally different. So yes, so the
Yeah.
values are interesting, and your definition is yours alone.
Yes, absolutely. To a great point around that was when we were in coach training. I remember having a conversation with one of our colleagues. We were talking about values, and he mentioned power being one of his. And so I'm looking at this word from my lens, from my past experiences, where I'm like, I've seen like corruption of power or abuse of power.
Yes.
And so I was like, really, power is like, and it almost made me look at this person as like in a different way. But then when it was like, well, how do you define power? Like, what does that
Yeah.
mean to you? And it was like, the ability to exert, like have agency is power to me. The ability to influence other people in a positive way is power to me. And it was like, oh, okay. So it's not like this, just like, dictatorship of like power, power, power. There's these really positive attributes behind it. And sometimes our definitions, I think, don't match up. And I think that's where it's really important to ask people too, when you are trying to understand their value system, or like what's important to them, how do you define that? And what does it mean to you to embody that? And what does it look like when you are honoring that value, to better understand like how they work as a human?
Yeah, just get really curious, because you will be
Yes.
shocked. Like you'll shocked, like you said. And that's another great example of how values can get really lines can get crossed if we're not really curious
Yes.
about and really understanding other people's what
Yeah.
motivates them.
Yeah. Especially in
Yeah,
the workplace too, right? Like
like
that can be
relationships.
really important.
Yeah, workplace, which is a whole other episode about just getting curious. Like,
Yeah.
let's be curious, right? Just so
Yes.
we can figure it all out. Yeah.
All right. So we'll wrap up motivation, and then next week's episode will be on the empathy and social skills, which is
Yes.
kind of like a combined but last component of emotional intelligence. So I look forward to having that conversation with you.
Conversation. Thanks again, Kristen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Do you need to pause, potty break,
I
anything?
I need to get chapstick. I keep rubbing my lips. You're rubbing your lips too much.
Oh no, it's
You got yours
tis
right
the
there.
season. Tis the season.
And outside running in the morning, it's so cold.
Which feels like a weird thing to say.
What is that? I know, right? In this all right. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you need anything? Are you good?
I think I'm good. Yeah, I still have half a glass of water. So, okay. So we are back for the fourth and final episode of the 4-episode series on emotional intelligence. And I'm joined again today by Rachel Kuhlen. And the subject for today is going to be around empathy and social skills. So this is the last kind of component of the 4 areas of emotional intelligence. So let's start off with empathy. And I think it's important to define what empathy is, because I think a lot of times people get this confused with sympathy, which these are obviously 2 very different ways of how we're showing up for people. So how would you define these 2 words?
Yeah. Empathy is our ability to like understand, share, resonate with thoughts, feelings, perspectives in another person. That's what empathy is. Sympathy is that feeling sorry for. I always think of empathy as just holding space, just
Mhm.
holding space to be with someone. And it's invaluable. When we think about emotional intelligence, we talked about self awareness, self regulation, motivation, which while they have internal and external components, I feel from the emotional intelligence space, this is where we start to really get into the external
Yeah.
space a lot more,
Mhm.
and how we're showing up for other people. And empathy is a big part of that in our lives.
Yes. Yeah. I think when I think about this in the, especially in the work environment, it's the recognition that, we actually touched on this in the chat prior to this about, we're humans first, and then we're doing the job that we're doing. And I think empathy is recognizing that a lot of times we don't know everything that's going on in people's lives. We don't recognize maybe the past experiences, trauma, I think can sometimes play a role in this. um, and understanding that like people are showing up in the way that they're showing up for a reason. um, and empathy is holding space for their human experience, and understanding that maybe they're just not having a good day, or maybe they're having a fight with their spouse, or this morning their dog puked on the carpet and their whole morning got wrecked and they were running behind and they're still feeling flustered. And I think that's a great way to put it, is that you're holding space for that person and their experience, realizing that maybe sometimes we don't always know everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with sympathy, again, in the workplace would be, you have a coworker that maybe goes through the loss of a loved one or the loss of a pet or some
Yeah.
life altering experience, and what you feel for them. And that is sympathy. It's, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for, your, whatever the situation that you're in. And I think it's also a lot of times looking at people's experiences and saying like, I can understand how that would make you feel the way that you're feeling, or show up the way that you're showing. Um, because I can, and maybe the circumstances are similar. You've been through that same thing. Obviously, the way that we all handle events is going to be completely different, but it's saying, I think it's a lot of it is validating, acknowledging and validating that this is your experience or your reaction to it, or, the place that you're operating from makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that,
And you're not making it about you in the sense
yes.
of like, well, the time when this happened to me, right? It's just holding space for another person. You laugh because that's all happened to all of us, right?
Yep.
And some people haven't had, they're trying to show up. They maybe have never experienced a loss in a certain way. And they
Yep.
don't know. So like we'll give people, space and grace in that. But like, well, this time when this happened to me, it's not that at all.
Right.
Um, and there's different types of empathy, right? There's cognitive empathy where like I understand, I see you have, thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Like I get that that's happening. There's that emotional empathy space, right? Where I can feel the same emotions. I know you've had tremendous loss. I've had tremendous loss. We've held space for each other in that space. Like I know what that, like
Yeah.
I don't know your experience, but oof, I know loss and I get emotional. And then that compassionate empathy, right? That the empathetic, just we get really compassionate about what's going on, and it goes beyond understanding and sharing emotions. It's that genuine desire to help somebody else.
Yes.
Compassionate empathy, right?
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
there's a few types of empathy that show up in different space and place.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, like another trap that people fall into when maybe somebody's sharing something that's going on in their life is like the comparative suffering, where it's like, oh, well, if you think that's bad, you should hear about my experience with this. It was so much worse. And then taking it to the level of like, well, you know what, this is how I handled it.
Yeah.
And that's going to be like the magic solve for you. It's very much like I remember having the first conversation with you after my dad had passed, and you had shared that you lost your mom, which was something I did not even, I didn't know. Um, and you were a true example of empathy, where it's like you can understand like the impact and just like the gravity of the situation that you're in, and like your whole world feels like it's turned upside down. But it wasn't like, well, let me give you some advice on how to navigate grief, because everybody's grieving path is going to be completely different, of what works for them, what doesn't. But you offered things that were like, I found soothing in this, as ideas of like, maybe this is something to try, without it being like, here's the directive on how to get through this kind of thing. And
Yeah.
sharing in that sense too, that it was like, I understand, like when you're having these feelings of anger or of anxiety, like that's completely normal and understandable why you would be experiencing those things when you've just had this major shift in your entire world. And I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but you told me like it was like grieving is love with no place to go.
It's just love that has nowhere to go.
Yeah, which was such a like it was so helpful, but it was this universal thing. It wasn't like, accept this as your truth. It was just like, here's something that like, I found a lot of solace in this quote, and it helped a lot. So I think, there's a lot of interpersonal skills, I think, that come into our abilities to be empathic or to be role models when it comes to empathy. What are some of those interpersonal skills that come into play?
So when we talked about emotional intelligence, we talked about all these components. They all have to come together. If I don't have self-awareness, I don't know how to regulate myself. I'm not very motivated. I'm probably not going to show up in an empathetic space for you in a way that's really meaningful because I haven't worked on the other things enough. And I think when we also think about empathy, we all didn't always grow up with great examples of what empathy looks like and how that shows up. And I'm glad we're talking about it more and more. I love that I get to talk about it more and more with people, that because people do, they want to make it about them. They don't know what to do or say, so they react in a way that like, oh gosh, but they don't even know, and it can get very confusing. so
Yeah.
so much empathy and like interpersonal skills, it's how we communicate, right? And it is about self-regulation. How am I keeping maybe my thoughts to myself, or not saying anything, or just being quiet in this moment. It's having consideration, it's taking your ego out of it, right? How do I take my ego out of this at this moment, and so that I can just have space. And I think there's a lot of interpersonal skills that can come into empathy. Uh, but I think one of the best things we can do is just hold space. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
we feel so compelled to have to say or talk in quiet spaces, or when we don't know what to do or say, we feel so compelled to do something instead of just like, I can just hold
Yeah.
space, sit here
Yeah.
with you and nod, and that and that's what I can give right now. If that
Yes.
makes
Yes, it does. And I think, you always ask this question, and I think it's like such a great way to show up with empathy is, how can I best support you right now?
uh,
And let them decide, oh, I just want somebody to listen to me vent, or I'd really like any advice that you might have to give, or it's asking them, how can I best fulfill your needs in this space? Because I do think when you do that, it takes you out of it. And it's their directive now of like, how can I best show up for you with what you need?
yeah, what do you need, right? Because I could have my guesses and it could be right on, or it could be totally off, and they might not need anything, and that's okay. And I can mark a reminder to check
Yeah.
in on them. You can just say, I'm thinking about you, whatever it is, but
Yeah.
giving them, people, the space to decide what's best when it comes for the support that they
Yeah.
need.
Yes. And there's
So,
a good practice in patience right there too, because a lot of times I think when people are in like the hot mess express mix of something that's going on, a lot of times they don't know what they need, and so you can ask that question of like, how can I best support you? And there's that holding space when they come back and say, I don't really know. That's okay too. Like, it's okay for you to not have figured out like what you need in this space, but I just want you to know, like, I'm here.
yeah,
And whenever you do figure that out, like, just know that I'm here to support you in whatever way that I can.
yeah. Or even, I think a great thing if people are like that, I don't know, and like, great, you don't want to know. When you think, here's three things that I'm off the top of my mind that I might be able to support you with, and
Yeah.
give them ideas, because if you don't know, you don't know, right? And
Yep.
so it can help. And empathy, I think, is a very underrated opportunity for all of us. We're not walking around really being empathetic people.
Yeah.
Uh, and to earlier conversations, we're usually doing our thing, and not that we're trying to be rude or mean or not whatever. We're all thinking about ourselves. We
Yeah.
really are. We really, really are. And empathy is a skill that can be cultivated that I think is incredibly powerful. It is like a power skill. It is definitely not a soft skill
Yes.
that you can people just want to feel heard. You know how many conversations I've gone into thinking I'm going to have to like know all this stuff or whatever. And then they start talking and they talk the whole time, which is great. And then they think it was the best conversation they've had in their life. And like, well, you did all
Yeah.
the talking. That's great. You know, like, I can just sit here and hold space with you. And I think empathy can go a very long way in a lot of situations to create
Yeah.
beauty on the outside of it. But we often overlook empathy
Yes.
as a
Yes.
real skill, but it really is a power skill.
Yeah. And like what you just said makes me think back to like coach training when you go into it thinking that it's like advice giving and like people come to you with their problems and you're going to have to solve them. And so, there's almost this pressure when you start like practice coaching where you're like, well, crap, what if I don't know the answer to this? What if I don't know what to tell them? Or like, and it is all about holding space and removing yourself from the story, because there is always a story that's going on, with them, and being that outside perspective detached from the outcome of like where this is going to go. You don't have to solve anybody's problems. You just have to be that conduit of letting them just get everything out there and come to their own resolution, their own insight of what they need next or what the next step might be for them. And I think that is an extreme form of empathy that it doesn't come across as like, that's not how what we were taught. It's like, let's teach you guys how to be empathetic. But
Yeah.
ultimately that's what it taught us is holding space for somebody and just being there to say, like, I'm sure that was a really, really tough situation.
Yeah.
And, and then asking the questions, obviously, that come along with it, the empowering,
Questions.
yeah, the open-ended questions where it's not always like this yes or no or coming to one conclusion sort of thing, like keeping things open and letting that just like intuition drop in.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that too is just listening.
Yeah.
Like just like to be in space with me and just listen, right? And I think that's why coaching and therapy are so powerful, because I can sit in this space and talk to someone.
Mm-hmm.
They listen to every word that is coming out of my mouth, and then they're asking me a follow-up question. But I mean, talk about like, and no wonder people
Yeah.
come up with their own ideas, because they feel like I'm actually being heard, and someone asked me a question that wasn't motivated by their needs or wants or what they think I should do. And we don't often get
Yeah.
to space like that.
Yep.
And it's why empathy listening
Yeah.
are
It's
skills.
almost like when you start to tell somebody something, like a problem that's going on or whatever the situation is, and they're offering like the fixes to it,
Yes.
that just like almost closes the door. And I can think about like the therapy sessions, the coaching sessions that I've had where like the real raw emotion of something has come up and it's like, okay, no, I'm ugly face crying. But that was 100% coming from just being able to talk it out
Yeah.
without interruption, without somebody putting their perspective on it or telling me how to fix it or what I should do. It was just allowing me to like talk the whole story out and asking a question of like, what about that was hard? And then you go, you dive back into it and then it's like, here comes the truth, right? It's like, and the
Yes.
insight comes, which is always the beautiful thing.
Yep.
But then, the work that follows after you
I got to
have
do
that, but
something with
it's like
it.
this cathartic
So
thing when you have a trusted safe space with somebody that you can allow yourself to go to the depths of that and say and like really show the true raw emotion that's behind it. Because I think when you let go of a lot of that resistance that you're holding all that emotional stuff inside, I think it does open up that space for now the new insights, the new things, opportunities to come in.
yeah, and I think a great point that you bring up when we talked about empathy and being able to listen, but also you're in a space that's non-judgmental. So, right, that's
Mm-hmm.
why coaching and therapy very like non-judgmental, and also in a space where oh, and I just had it. It's non-judgmental. Oh, and they're not going to say anything to anyone about any
Yeah.
of it. Like
Yes.
true, like your secret's safe, unless someone's going to hurt themselves or things are going on. Like,
Right, right, right.
and it is not going anywhere past outside this room,
Yes.
which is a
Yes.
gift. That's a gift to give people. And to switch back to something else you said, I think I did this for you once. And when I didn't know how to show up in a space, I was like, do you need a friend, a coach, or advice? Like, look
Yeah.
for right now, so that, or just someone to listen. Like,
Yeah.
you tell me what you need and I will show up in that space in this moment. Like,
Yeah.
right, the last thing you want to do is show up, because some people do want advice, right? You can have empathy and they want advice, they want to hear what's going on or whatever. And some people are like, I don't need you to tell me what to do. I just need to talk it out, and I need someone
Yeah.
to just listen.
Yep.
Or I want someone to help me process this. So
Yeah.
if you're not sure and you want to hold space for someone in empathy, like, do you need a coach? Do you need advice? Do you just need listening? Like, again, to the point, like, you tell me what you need, and then great, we're all
Yeah.
set. Instead of me
Yep.
thinking that I need to solve or fix or
Yep.
coach, and
Yes.
then we're definitely not seeing eye to
Yeah.
eye.
And you know, typically when you're in a coaching relationship with somebody, you're not necessarily in that advice space, you know, that
Yeah,
we're more there to, you know, for them to come to their own insights. But it was like that particular instance, it's like, I need to come up with a response like right now. So I don't really have the time to coach, or like, I'm just asking from you. Like, I know that you are very good at this particular thing, and you're also not in the situation. What would be the best response? Because I'm not at the capacity right now to come up with a response that I think is going to be self-regulated in a sense.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
just, what would your advice be in the situation of like how to respond to this and put an end to it, but not necessarily from like, I don't think that's the normal thing that we go to our coaches and we're like, give me advice on what to say in this email.
Yeah, but I and to that point, and I learned this from somebody else. I'm like, that's so good, because not there are some times, and we're not talking about coaching relationships necessarily, but empathy. When you're in a space of empathy, we talked about, where you're not really sure what
Yeah.
this person needs, right? So how best do I support you? Like, what can I do? But like, also, how do you want me to show up? Because
Yes.
I don't want to get it wrong. And this is really good
Yeah.
for relationships too, our partner relationships, where you're like, how do you want me to show up right now? Because we get, our habits are like, I'm going to tell you what to do and give you advice. And here's your list of 10 different things.
Yep.
And what the last thing we want is to create a space where we don't feel comfortable or we don't feel
Yes.
heard. And that's why empathy is
Yeah.
like a power skill.
It is. It is. And I want to touch back to a point that you made about like having, you know, with your coach or your therapist, that trust level where it's like, if I share this with you, because there's a lot of times, especially in therapy, it's very, very personal. You know, this can be, you know, past traumas. This can be very, you know, deep, dark secrets that nobody else on the planet knows about, that you're choosing to share with this person, and trust that it's not going to go anywhere outside of that. And I think this comes back to, I mean, a big part of this is the culture that you're working in your work environment. When we tie this into a workspace,
Oh,
I
yes.
think there is many times a lack of trust between coworkers. Like, if I tell you this, does it mean that you're going to go tell somebody else? You're going to tell our boss, you're going to tell your husband. And so then the next time I see you guys in a social situation, it's weird because
Now
now
he
he
knows.
knows. Yeah. You know, so it's like you have to, I think that's an important part of like building the skill of empathy, is that you have to be a safe, trusted space for somebody, that it's like you've shown them by demonstration that it's like, you can tell me things and it's not going to go any further than where we are.
And that's all about emotional intelligence, right? Like,
Yeah.
that in any conversation, even at work conversations, lunch with a girlfriend or a friend, whatever it is, and we're like, that's when we really get the opportunity in our own self-awareness and our regulation to not judge,
Yep.
to gossip about it with somebody later on. Can you let me tell my friend so she knows, did you hear what so and so, what happened to so and so, right? Because that's significance for me right now. I'm looking for, my ego wants a nice energy boost. It wants a
Yeah.
kick. I want to feel really good. I want to feel like I know everything first.
Yep.
But when we raise our level of emotional intelligence, we don't, those things, you're not looking for those things, because I'm not getting my validation or my needs from something that's happened in your life that now I need to
Yep.
like, that's the way you're getting your, it's not a healthy
Yeah.
way, but a lot of people do find significance.
Yes.
And that's why people gossip at work and friends, and that's why people judge and talk and do the things because, right, I can
Yeah.
create group and unsignificance. And but when we raise our level of emotional intelligence, we're talking about those are things we don't do, right?
Yep. Yep.
That's not what we want to be doing. And it's a good practice. I mean, if you to if someone is sharing and holding space with you, just to hold space, and that's
Yeah.
it. That,
Yep.
and that's part of your, and what you get from that too is now you're raising your level of self-awareness, self-regulation.
Yes.
You're also growing at that same time.
Yes. Because
But
we are mirrors for each other, and
totally,
when we recognize things in other people that trigger us, or that's a great reflection back of like, okay, why did what that person said, why did I take that personally? Or like, what triggered me about that? And I think that, I mean, this ties beautifully into the social skills at work, because I think
yeah,
it's brilliant that you combine these, because I think they are like so hand in hand. And I think too, when we go back to like the communication, the trust, the psychological safety, not just with empathy, but I think this kind of like maybe leads more into the social skills aspect of emotional intelligence at work, is having transparent conversations where it's like, if two employees are having a disagreement or not seeing eye to eye, and there's this rift or this constant fighting that's going on, and the manager's talking to one person solo and talking to another person solo, and then there's no communication back and forth about like what was talked about, you're only getting like one side of the story there. And you also don't understand what what is the resolution here? Like, I know that this person's been talked to, and I know that I've been talked to, but then like, where do we come into
happening.
that space? And I think when you lack that, when you can't have those transparent conversations, and again, trusting that like it's not going to go anywhere outside of like the manager's office, and the conversation that we had together is so important in order to build the social skills.
The psychological safety in the
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
But this goes back to episode one. We're like only 10 or 15% of us are practicing self-awareness correctly. Might be generous to but I wouldn't even put myself in that category all the time. But only 10 to 15% of people are. So when you go into a work environment, you already know like most people in any environment, the grocery store, wherever you are, like most people
Yeah.
are not practicing self-awareness correctly. We're not really
Yes.
thinking about things like, so we're relying a lot on hope.
Yeah.
Like maybe they'll figure it out. And that's not a diss on them. Like we're all learning, like we're all trying to grow, we're all trying to
Yeah.
figure these things out. But coming with that awareness, knowing that, and just
Yeah.
like that you're gonna get what you're gonna get, unfortunately, sometimes in some situations. It is not.
Yeah. And I think too, when I think about, is that because just having these conversations, with you over the last few weeks, of course, it makes you start to pay attention to these things a little bit more. And I think what I notice more is people may have self-awareness of themselves. Like, I know what I'm feeling, I know what's going on in my head, but the piece that a lot of people aren't taking into consideration is how are others perceiving me, or how are my actions and behaviors
Yeah.
affecting other people. And that's creating this relationship dynamic that maybe is or isn't working. And then there's not a lot of awareness around like, this relationship isn't working, but I'm a part of this equation. So I have to look at how I'm being perceived and
Yes.
ask. There's the curiosity point again, that it's like, when I ask you questions, you seem to come from a very defensive place. And I'm just trying to figure out like, why do you feel like you have to be defensive? Because I'm not trying to question you or your work ethic or but that's kind of your response. And once people realize like, oh, that's how I'm perceived as being defensive, then it sheds light on it. It's like, that's the opportunity for them to say, oh, I need to show up differently because I'm not being perceived well. But I think that's the part of self-awareness. And I think this goes back to like Tasha Urich's talk, is that's the part that we're missing, is like how we're being perceived by others.
that external self-awareness piece is big, right? Because that internal self-awareness piece, and I wouldn't even say we all know I mean, we think we know what's going on. We don't always
Yeah.
know, but the external component is very important. And and how that's being communicated across is also very important, right? Because if I'm in an argument with my partner and I'm like, you're being defensive, like that's probably gonna make him even, I'm not being defensive, right? Like that could create even a bigger
Yes.
versus like negative communication patterns, and recognizing if he's triggered and he's being defensive, all right, he's triggered right now. His
Yeah.
negative communication is defensive. I'm not saying that's what it is, but like that's what it is. And like when I have that knowledge and enough self-awareness, I can shift how I show up in that situation to navigate their negative communication language
Yeah.
so that we can actually have a conversation that's meaningful to make adjustments and changes because I got to get them out of that. But to
Yeah.
your point, a lot of times we don't even realize we're doing it. Like it's so, and it's hard to have empathy for people when people are being
Yes.
defensive or critical or whatever, and like, be
Or
like,
contempt. And, here we
it's
dive
hard.
into
It's hard.
all of the,
Yeah, it's hard
the
to have.
conflict languages.
Yeah, it's hard to have empathy when there are people when they're acting like that because we think about
Yeah.
empathy like we had a lost situation together, you and I, so like unless we're like it's hard to be empathetic for people when they're acting crazy and being like,
Yeah.
well, like it's not our initial go to a space, but all we can
Yes.
control is what, and that's how we show up, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
those little pieces, just the little things are enough just to bring awareness, enlightenment to help shift. Where am I doing it that I need to make a change
Yes.
to? Yeah, you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. And workspaces, we spend so much time at work that
Yeah.
years of ingrained culture, the way things are done, the how or the types of people they hire. Like there's all of these factors that are
Yeah.
coming to play in this space. And
And you
yeah,
never really know, like, no, what the situation is that you're coming into, like when you start a new job, right? You go through the interview process and it's like, well, I can only give like my assessment based on this maybe hour-long interview that I had with one person about what the culture's like, about what the other people in my department are like. A lot of times you don't get to meet all those people before you are, before you accept a position. And then you come into it. And I think you're then like facing the facts of like, oh, this is what the situation is. And for me, I know too, it's like there are triggers from past jobs
oh
that will
yeah,
show up for me in a current job. And it's like, okay, there's that moment where it's like, I need to recognize that this isn't the same situation. I'm reacting to this because there was a point in time where I did experience a really negative experience from that.
yeah,
But it's also like, how can I approach this differently so that I don't, because I know how I did it the last time and maybe the outcome wasn't so great. How can I approach this differently from this time and like calibrate that into this, this new position? And I think it's an important point too, like when we think about empathy and social skills in the work environment, if this is just my take on it, I'd love to hear what you think. But if you are in a work environment where you realize that there's a lack of this and there's not going to be a change in that direction, I think you really have to ask yourself in that situation if this is an environment that you can flourish in and thrive in, and or do I need to make a change if I've tried everything to control how I show up in the situation and things are not changing. Because you're right, you're there 36, 40, 50 sometimes hours a week. These people become like some weird sort of family to you, and it's hard not to take that stuff home and have it bleed into all the other areas of your life if it is chaotic and there's no psychological safety, there's no rules of engagement of how we interact with each other or interact with management. When we have things that come up or situations that come up that we feel like maybe are unsafe or not conducive to a positive work environment, how are those handled or not handled? I don't know. I'd love to hear what your take is on when you find yourself in that situation.
you said it right. Like what can we control? And that's only ourselves, how I'm showing up, what's going on. That's all I can control. And the trap that we fall into is thinking that I have no choice.
Yeah. It may not be
That's
the easiest choice, right? Like there's a lot of factors that play into like, I'm
right,
just going to say peace out, Girl Scout, and go find a better
right,
environment.
right.
But it's like that pro con list of like, okay, if I stay in this, though, what's going to be the negative outcomes from that, which could be, mental health issues. It could be dysregulated nervous systems because you're always like going into fight, flight, freeze when you're going into work because it is a not conducively
Chaotic.
happy,
Yes.
chaotic, toxic environment. So I think it is important to look at like what's the pros, what's the cons, and then but that in itself, the decision to stay or go, I think is so empowering because it's like then it becomes a choice that you've made. Um,
Yeah, right. I'm making an active choice. And listen, there are times I love it. We have to peace out Girl Scout. Like there are times in our lives where
yeah,
we have to make very quick decisions and big decisions about certain things, relationships, careers, where like staying any longer is detrimental or possibly
yeah,
even worse to me, my existence or whatever's going on. So 100%. But the illusion is thinking we don't have a choice. You always have a choice.
yeah,
It's what you do with that choice. And maybe right now I do need to stay because I need the money. I just need the stability right now. But like if you're not getting your resume out there, if you're not applying for jobs when you get home, like if you're not like doing the thing, or whatever
yes,
needs to happen to make that other, because and that's what I think people have. But people think like, I need the job, I can't do this, there's no way, or and I get like we've made decisions, we have lives, we have bills, there's things going on, and we can't always just jump. But like making active choices and decisions towards
yes,
getting to where I need to go, though, that like,
yes,
okay, I get it, I can't leave right now, but I'm also going to be making decisions that I can
yes,
getting to where I need to go
yes,
versus just
yeah,
like this is just the way it is, and
yeah.
I I hate it. No, it's only 5 more years till I can retire anyway. Just stick it out. Like
Which I always hate that. Like, I can deal with this for another 10 years or another
I'm
two and a
like,
half years. And you're like, 2.5 years is a long time to be in a bad situation. Like, even sometimes a month is a long time to be in a bad situation. And so it's about like creating those steps. If you know that it's like, okay, I can't leave, like, give my 2 weeks notice today, like I would like. But what can I do to start putting things into place so that I can feel more secure in making this transition because I know it's a transition that needs to happen.
yeah,
And I think a lot of times too is there's control in deciding how you're going to show up in the interim where it's like, okay, I'm going to compartmentalize here and I'm going to go to work and I'm going to do the best job that I can doing the job that I'm there to do, but I'm not going to engage in the
gossip,
conflict, the
the
gossip,
conflict, like
the
yeah,
and it's a looking at it from like this 8, 10, 12 hours, whatever your shifts might be, are dedicated. I've committed to this. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be committed to the people, to the chaos, to the process of change, to bringing self-awareness to my leaders and other people. It's like, I'm just going to get there, do the best job that I can,
be
and
nice
there's a little
person.
bit of disengagement, I think, from that, but I think it's also healthy disengagement sometimes.
I mean, social skills are the playground rules for the adult world. Like it's how we're all going to get along in the sandbox. So whether you are there and you're in a good space, and that's how we're getting along, the social skills, so that we're all in a, how that, and even if you want to leave a space, like how you show up, like I'm not going to be rude or awful. Like I'm still going to
Ah,
play nice in the sandbox and do the things that need to be done and communicate appropriately and show
yep.
kindness.
Yes.
Social skills are those playground rules in the life and how we're getting along. And playgrounds are crazy places. Like there's bullies and there's kids throwing sand and toys and stealing things. I mean, like, playground isn't
Yeah.
always a great place, but the social skills are
Yeah.
those skills that we need, those interpersonal skills we need to show up, how we listen, how we communicate, how we self-regulate, all the good things that we want to do,
Mhm.
um, that are for our own edification, in the sense that like this is about, I'm doing this, I'm showing up well, but I'm doing it to honor me as well. Like
Yeah.
you know, I'm honoring myself by showing up well in the
Yeah.
space that I am. And we've learned from motivation, people can learn, some spaces can't, and
Mhm.
you have a choice.
Yeah. And I think boundaries again comes into this space as well, where it's like, what am I willing to tolerate and deal with? Um, and I think, man, thinking back to like the episode with Cheryl and like the deep dive on boundaries there, sometimes it is so hard to lay the boundary, especially if you're coming from a place of a people pleasing background where you never really said no. And so when you do say no, it's so uncomfortable to say, like, no, I'm not willing to do that. Um, and I think it takes a lot of practice to get comfortable with that if that's the place that you've always kind of been moving from. But I think it is being very clear about what you're willing to tolerate and not tolerate
Yep.
in that space. And maybe that's moving forward, you've decided to stay in the job and setting boundaries that are just going to make it more healthy, or it's the boundaries that I need to put in until I can find, this is just an interim until I can find something else. But I think when you do that, it sets you up for success in the sense of you've made clear where your line in the sand is. It's almost, to me, it's a little bit disheartening because I feel like in a lot of environments at work that it's like when we talk about the sandbox rules, like this is stuff that we should have learned as we grew into adulthood. And yet you see a lot of work environments where it's like we are acting like high school girls,
Well, I know.
talking behind each other's backs, and like the gossip and the negativity and the I'm only willing to work with this person, I'm not willing to work with this person, and this person doesn't do this and this person doesn't do, I mean, it's just like, you guys, we are grown ass adults, like, that can have rational conversations. And sometimes that seems like it is the hardest thing in the world to accomplish.
I think adults can be the worst, right? Because we're set and ingrained in patterns of behavior. Like, if I complain enough, I'll get my way. If I'm
Yeah.
the greasy wheel, it's, you know, yeah, people are going to do what I need to have done. If I'm loud enough, people are going to, they're going to back down, right? So it's almost like we've learned that your behavior is a language, and your
Yes.
behavior is speaking for you. It is telling you, you know, and if people get what they want, that's, you know, why would I
Yeah.
change? I'm going to get what I want. And social skills is so much bigger than that. As we start to enhance our level of emotional intelligence, our ability to regulate, to recognize when we're doing things, when we're manipulating, when we're coming from a place of insecurity or self-doubt, or be willing to try something different, like try a different
Yeah.
perspective or way. Like, so emotional intelligence, the conversation I think you asked in the first episode, like, why are we talking about it more? Because we realize, like, they're whole human beings, and
Yes.
we all got things that are going on in our space, and but we all have opportunity to grow, develop,
Yes.
to learn, to shift, just to be that
Yes.
much better. And social skills, it's the playground rules, it's how we get
Yeah.
along.
And this is something, I mean, again, that like all of the components of emotional intelligence are not just in the workplace. These translate into every aspect of your life. So the social skills that you develop at work are then going to translate into the social skills of how you're dealing with the people in your non-work life as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense to me. And I think too, like when you're looking at the work environment, you have to ask that question of like, are people recognizing that we're showing up as humans first to do a job? But there's this human, this being that is complex and has multifacets and has a lot of different things going on in their lives. And as much as we would like to think that we can separate work life from personal life and don't bring your personal stuff to work and don't bring your work stuff home, that's just not how it works, you know? And if you are in an environment where you're like, I don't see this changing, I don't see that it's ever going to shift from being a productivity, like you are a being who's here to do the thing and do it as fast as possible and make all the money for the company, and they're never taking that human aspect into consideration, I think that's a pretty good signal right there where it's like maybe not the best environment to
It's
thrive
all about
in.
Yeah. And that's what we start to learn when we raise our level of emotional
Mhm.
intelligence. We're like, this really isn't a space that fits me. Maybe 10 years ago, I would have toughed it
Yeah.
out, did it because that's just where I am. But today and where I am, it doesn't align.
Yes.
And any environment that we're in, this could be friend circles, this really, family circles, this could be any sort of group space that we're in where we can learn a lot about ourselves
Yeah.
and what's important,
Yes.
what we want, what we don't want. If we just sit back and watch and listen.
Yes. I completely agree.
Yeah.
So thinking about like the kind of key takeaways with empathy and social skills, like what kind of came out for me through all of this is first is just listening to what is going on with other people, and not taking it from the perspective of ego trying to solve the problem. It's the active listening skill. Um, being a space of validation and support for your coworkers. I think practicing self-awareness in the sense of like conflict management, conflict resolution. How am I showing up for this? How could I better show up for this? Um, and that obviously, I mean, self-regulation plays a huge part in that too. And then the communication, like how are we communicating? Is it effective? Is it positive? Is it moving us forward? Is it transparent? I mean, really, I mean, wow, it comes down to communication's huge, I think, in this aspect. And then figuring out too, like, how can I be the best team player in this situation? If it is an environment that you do want to stay in. Another quote that just kind of came to my head, this came up for me in another podcast conversation. It was like, communication is what lays between you and the thing that you want the most. And it's like, how are you communicating? How are you showing up? How are you engaging with other people? Um,
Yeah.
so
And
if
communication, behaviors communicate, like how we act, the things we do, like not even to say the things that are coming out of our mouth. It
Yeah,
all it all plays a part. I think when it comes to
yeah,
empathy and social skills, you're like anything, you're never done. There's always something we can be doing more, different, better,
yes,
new things.
yeah,
Just showing up. I think for anything, just showing up. And
yes,
I think I love what you said, just pulling your ego out of it. Like
yeah,
this conversation doesn't have to be about me. It doesn't, and but we're habituated. We have our
yep,
habits and our patterns, and we have a lot to learn. And I think this world, I think we
yes,
all agree that this this space can use a lot more empathy and social skills. And it starts with this.
100%, 100%.
Starts.
Yeah, I think I mean, that's such an important point that you made, because I think a lot of times we forget this. We think that like we're going to get to this point of emotional intelligence, like this skill that we've mastered, right? And we've gotten it down, and like, I don't have to do any more work in this. And it's like, more is always going to be asked of you. The growth never stops. And it's like, whether it's this job and this situation, or the situation with your partner, or a situation with a friend or family member, it's showing you where you're not showing up, and that's your growth opportunity. And you have to look at this from like, it's a journey with really no destination. You don't ever arrive at personal growth where you don't have to keep working on yourself. Like, you're going to keep experiencing new things that are going to challenge you to grow and expand. And I think a lot of people see that as they're like, well, then this is not really like, if I don't get an outcome immediately, or I have to like keep doing these things, like, is this really something that I want to sign up for? But I always see it as like, when there's an obvious area for growth, I'm like, that's just showing me that I have more potential
Oh my
than where I'm
God.
at.
And when you do the work, like your influence, your ability to impact, like what happens dramatically changes in your life when you start doing the work.
Yeah.
Is it path straight and narrow? Absolutely not. But like it's like an onion and a puzzle. So as you start
Hmm.
to peel away the onion, more puzzle pieces start to come in. Things that were not even that were laying dormant start to sort of
Right.
filter in too, right? And so now we're starting to put the puzzle together and we're unlayering the onion at the same time, but the joy, the
Yes.
peace, the excitement to live in values, the happiness, all the things that come from when we raise our level of emotional intelligence, like you win, and
Yes,
everything else around you wins.
absolutely. I honestly couldn't agree more. Keep on that growth journey, people.
Yeah,
Just keep going.
do it. Yeah, one every day. What's the next best decision I can make? And
Yes. So the last question that I would have for you to kind of like full circle this and bring this back. So we've kind of talked about why emotional intelligence is important for us is like just even the worker showing up to do the job. But I think this is super important for particularly leaders in companies to have these skills or be developing these skills. And I'm kind of curious as to like what you think as far as why this is so important for leaders in particular to develop this.
well, I mean, studies have shown that when we practice emotional intelligence as leaders, right, our employees, the people that work with us, they respect us more. They recognize like like they recognize the opportunities in themselves and what's going on. There's a lot more trust going on. But as a leader, like I said, it's about impact. Like you're making impact. You're able to influence other. Your ability to be adaptable in changing environments. As a leader, like continuing to have a positive outlook and holding not sunshine and rainbows all the time, but like, all right, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fix this together? Like, let's move this forward. It's our ability to be resilient as leaders, right? Because as
Mhm.
leaders, we have to keep going at their ability to bounce back, and handle stress and to regulate. So emotional intelligence is, I call it, it's like a superpower. It's a superpower to have. And when we raise our level of emotional intelligence, we're learning more about ourselves. We're making changes. We're fixing the things that need to be fixed. We're navigating through old stories and things that are going on and reforming belief systems, like in living our core values. Like you win, right? And people see that and they recognize that and they want to be where you are. And science and studies shows that exact same thing.
Yeah.
That they want to work for people, and they will, and they'll work hard. They trust more and they want to be with you, and it's
Yeah.
wonderful. I think for
Yeah.
for all leaders in this life, and we all have an opportunity to just keep growing.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Rachel, first of all, I appreciate all of the effort and work and knowledge and wisdom that has gone into what I think is like an incredible 4-part series on a super important topic. Like I think I've shared with you, I'm like in all of the other podcast conversations that I've had, there has been some element of emotional intelligence that has come into the conversation. And this is a wide breadth of like topics and things that are being talked about. Um, but I truly appreciate like your expertise and sharing that and going on a deep dive with me to bring this, I think, into more awareness, and giving people the skills and the resources to be able to start practicing these skills and integrating them not only into their work life, but into their personal life as well. So this season, I'm wrapping up with one question for every guest,
All
kind of
right.
putting all of these things together to see what kind of a melting pot of answers I get. So if I were to offer the phrase to thrive in life, what comes up for you?
Oh man, I love that. To thrive in life, got to go within. Don't go within, you go without, right?
Very true.
So
Yep.
it's thrive in life, you got to go in, because we, like I said, and I've said it again, like you win and everyone else around you wins when
Yes.
you are showing up for you and taking care of you. And I think to
Yeah.
thrive in life, we gotta do that.
Yep. The change starts with you. And that actually kind of reminds me too of that Rumi quote at the end of um, Tasha's TED talk where he said, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. And today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. Like it
Yeah,
always starts with the inside that then goes out to the outside
yeah,
external world.
I agree. That's a great question. Thank you. And
Beautiful
thank you for the
answer.
opportunity to be here. I've appreciated all our time together.
Yes, me
Congratulations
too.
on everything.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure at some point we'll have you back on the podcast again. Maybe another discussion about plants more in depth on that and like
Yeah.
what, the benefits of plants and what they do for us. Who knows? I mean,
We can
so
start
many
maybe a
things.
woo woo podcast. We invite our woo woo friends on. And
Yes. Yes, we have several I think people in our circle that are also like looking into the Kabbalah thing, which I think would be a really interesting conversation. I had the guest from season 1, Danielle, that talked a lot about Kabbalah and your kind of like that whole idea that your soul is here to expand in all these different ways, which of course opened up floodgates for me as far as like, oh, I need to look into this more. So yeah, definitely. I mean, we connect on so many different points, but thank you again for your time. And I'm sure we'll see you back in the pod soon.
All right. Take care.
You too.